You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood, art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today my guest is Judith Lissauer Cromwell, the author of a new biography, Louise-Élisabeth Vigée Le Brun, Portrait of an Artist, 1755 to 1842. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
I am really excited because I always love to learn from people who know more than I do about a topic. I love history, but honestly, my knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep. I know a little bit about a lot of stuff, but you have done quite the deep dive on Vigée Le Brun here. Can you just start us off with what inspired you to look at her as a subject? I mean, history is full of interesting artists with unique stories and backgrounds. What made you think Elizabeth Vigée Le Brun was a subject you wanted to tackle?
A few years ago, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where I live, had a retrospective of Vigée Le Brun's paintings. It got terrific reviews. I had never heard of this artist, but because it got such great reviews, I decided to go and see the exhibit. I found the paintings were amazing, and her life story, the brief biography that the museum put at the beginning of the show, was riveting. I said to myself, this unusual woman is going to be the subject of my next book. That's how it's all started.
And, as you started to research, listeners, I'm going to give a little peek behind the curtain here. This is our second time around doing this interview because my computer failed us the first time. But you told me that you even traveled overseas to read primary sources, read letters and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think that if you tackle the story of a person's life, you're obligated to do as much research as you possibly can in order to present a fair picture of that person. You have to cast a wide net, and you have to dig very deep. So, you cannot leave any stone unturned. You have to examine every lead, which is why I went overseas. I went to London and Paris to look at the archives and look at Vigée Le Brun's letters. There aren't that many of them, but most of them are in Paris, but there are a few in London. And so I went there to look at those letters.
And I love the detail that you get into in this book. I mean, it's full of quotes from, not just her, but also other people, contemporaneous accounts and stuff, like, in their words. And I love that. It adds so much richness to the story. But I want to start off just going kind of chronologically. I mean, we're talking 18th century. She was born, 1755. And at that time, women artists were kind of a rarity. So can you just bring us through, like, how did she get into the arts and how did she become an accomplished artist?
She always liked to draw, even as a young child. When she was 5 years old, she remembers drawing and wanting to create. Her father was also an artist, pastelist, and he encouraged her, and he thought he saw that she had great talent. And she was very close to him. He died when she was 12. His death devastated her, and she couldn't even pick up her paintbrush and palette. She was just overcome with grief. And her mother was really worried about her. How could she help this child to come out of her grief? And she hit on the idea of taking her to see great art. At that time, there were no museums as we know them. So her mother used her husband's connections to get into private collections and got permission for Vigée Le Brun to visit and to work there. And that really jerked her out of her misery because she was so thrilled to see these great works of art and to copy them and to learn from them. And that's how she learned.
And
That's how she started to learn, and that persisted all her life long.
And she became quite the accomplished artist, even rising to become Marie Antoinette's favorite portraitist. And in the book, you described Elizabeth Vigée Le Brun and Marie Antoinette became as close to friends as people of those different sort of social strata could be. Can you describe for us a little bit about, like, how did Vigée Le Brun come to be the portrait painter of choice for Marie Antoinette? And, what did their sort of friendship look like?
Marie Antoinette was the daughter of the Empress of Austria, a very exacting woman. The Empress wanted a painting of Marie Antoinette as the Queen of France. And Marie Antoinette tried to satisfy her over a 10-year period. And I read the correspondence between the two women. That is, Marie Antoinette commissioned painter after painter. They were all men, as you pointed out originally. Most of the artists were men at that time. Painter after painter, and nobody was able to please either the mother or the daughter. Marie Antoinette, 10 years of this back and forth. And finally, Marie Antoinette was at her wit's end, and she decided to call in a young female painter who had become the fashion in Paris. That was Vigée Le Brun. She called her in and gave her the commission to paint her as the queen. And Vigée Le Brun did it. Mother, Maria Theresa, was thrilled, the Empress of Austria. She said, "I love your big painting. It looks like you." And she was very happy. So the two women accomplished something together. One of them picked the artist, and the other was the artist who succeeded. And it created a bond between them. They were two women who had succeeded together. And they became friends as much as they could be. Marie Antoinette liked pretty, charming people around her. Vigée Le Brun was very attractive, tons of charm. She knew how to please. She knew how to make friends. And they enjoyed one another. They used to sing duets together, and they liked the same music, and they were both young mothers. They had a lot in common, and but originally they were two women who had succeeded where all the men had failed. That's what created the bond between them.
I love that. And I'm also just blown away by the idea of a decade trying to get a good portrait. I mean, my kids won't tolerate more than like 5 minutes of me trying to take their picture without them, blinking and running off. And, 10 years trying to find someone to paint the right portrait. That is absolutely amazing. And so it must have been all the more satisfying when she finally found the person who could get it right. And, my understanding is that was kind of Vigée Le Brun's thing, was she understood what right looked like to her sitters. She was accurate in her representations, but also understood the vibe that they wanted to capture, the look that they wanted to capture. She, as an artist, I believe, had her own sort of style and sensibilities, but from what I understand, she was also just like really good at reading the person, the subject, and figuring out what was the right fit for them. Am I right in that?
Yes, you are. She took trouble with her sitters. She took trouble to get to know them. She would chat with them first. She said it relaxed them, and she could get the pose she wanted, and would hold the pose. But also, she got to know them, and in getting to know them, she was able to paint more than a likeness. She was able to paint a personality. And they all had personalities. Even many of them didn't have much of a personality, but she always found something that she could highlight and make the faces interesting.
Now, as much as, it seems like, she had obvious trauma and tragedy in her childhood, and then she rose through the ranks, and she was an amazing artistic success. Even like just in her 20s, I think, is when she hit and was getting those royal portrait commissions and stuff like that. So successful at a pretty young age, but of course some darkness was always looming on the horizon, it seems like. You know, listeners, if you are familiar with the name Marie Antoinette, her story did not end well, and for a lot of people in her circle as well. So can you talk to us a little bit about how the tides turned and what that looked like for Elizabeth Vigée Le Brun?
Yes, the relationship had its downside as well as its advantages. Marie Antoinette was not popular, and she became increasingly unpopular as time went on. There was an incredible amount of dirt spread around about her, most of it untrue. But once the pamphleteers got hold of something, they wrote, they had very fertile imaginations. They imagined all kinds of stuff about her, and it was in print, and people believed it because it was in print. And some of that mud splashed onto Vigée Le Brun. Now, Marie Antoinette could afford to ignore it because she was the queen. She said, I can't be bothered with all that. But Vigée Le Brun could not afford to ignore it because as a female painter, she had to preserve a perfect reputation. She always had a stellar reputation, no love affairs, nothing like that. She'd always avoided that because she knew that if she started having affairs, as many women did, she would be accused of succeeding because she slept with important people, and she didn't want any of that. So she was very careful about her reputation. And the mud that was splashed on her from Marie Antoinette threatened her reputation. To the point where she was so scared that that was one of the reasons she decided to leave Paris as the revolution ramped up. She was afraid. She was afraid for her life.
Yeah, and if I recall, the account was, she had to disguise herself and fled with her daughter in the dead of night, heading to Italy, right?
Yes, she went to Italy because she didn't say she was leaving France because of the revolution. She didn't want to say that. She said she was leaving France because she had an opportunity to go to Italy. And Italy was the mecca of every artist. It's the home of the Renaissance, the home of classical antiquity. Every artist to go to Italy to learn from the art there. She'd never been able to go because she was a woman. Women didn't travel alone by themselves, and she couldn't go. But this was an opportunity, so she said she was going to Italy. She left at midnight. She had disguised as a common working woman. She had practically no money on her. She left everything behind: fame, fortune, family, home, her country. She loved France, everything. And she took her daughter with her. She had an only child and the daughter's governess. And so she was a single working mother. She was solely reliant on herself to provide for the household, but she knew that she had two things that the revolution couldn't take away: her talent and her name. She was famous throughout Europe as Marie Antoinette's favorite painter. So she knew she would get commissions once she got to Rome, and that's what happened. She was able to earn a decent living and provide for the household and her daughter's education and the governess and everything.
Man,
But
that
it
is just
wasn't easy.
no, it is an amazing story. And just you think about the courage, the resilience. It is a hero's journey right there, with this whole narrative. And I cannot imagine what it must have been like to be in her shoes. And you know, I mean, I would love to be in her shoes just to have that kind of that level of talent, but the also strength of character and the courage is just, it's unfathomable to me. But I love how you tell this story and all the rich detail that you put into the book. We obviously don't have time to get into all of that right now because we're about to take a short break, but I'm going to encourage listeners, go out and buy Louise-Élisabeth Vigée Le Brun, Portrait of an Artist. It is available wherever you get your books, or check the links in the show notes. Now, after a short break, I'm going to get into a little bit more of specifics about Vigée Le Brun's work. We're back. My guest this week is Judith Lissauer Cromwell, author of a new biography on Louise-Élisabeth Vigée Le Brun. The book is called Portrait of an Artist, and it is a wonderful read. It is full of rich historical detail. There are also quite a few images of Vigée Le Brun's work in here. Now, in prepping for this, I asked you to pick out an image that you thought would be nice to discuss. Can you tell our listeners what made this particular portrait of Marie Antoinette a standout for you?
This portrait, it's called Marie Antoinette en gaule, which means in a muslin dress. It was exhibited at the first salon that Vigée Le Brun participated in. She became a member of the French Royal Academy of Art, and as such, she was able to show in the salon. The salon was the cultural and social event of the year. Everybody in Paris went. Old, young, rich, poor, every single class of people went to the salon. It was the place to go. It was always jam-packed. And Vigée Le Brun showed several paintings at the salon. This one caused a sensation. And the reason it caused a sensation was because there was a new fashion for women. Instead of the stiff, formal, sort of dress and blank powdered faces and stiff lacquered hairstyles that had been in fashion for quite a long time. The new fashion was simple, unstructured muslin dresses with no jewelry, unpowdered hair, very little makeup. And this was something Vigée Le Brun had been pushing her editors to use for a long time because she didn't like the stiff formality of the court dress. But it became the fashion, and Marie Antoinette took it up, and she liked it. She liked dressing that way. And she asked Vigée Le Brun to paint her in a muslin dress, which Vigée Le Brun did. And when it was shown at the salon, it caused a sensation because a lot of people said, this is not the way majesty should be represented. Majesty should be in gorgeous clothes. She should hold herself stiffly. She shouldn't be smiling. She wasn't really smiling, but shouldn't have a kind expression in her face. She should be majestic. And other people, not everybody agreed with that. Some of the critics, and I've quoted a couple of them, I think, in the book, said it's a beautiful painting. The Queen looks great. There's nothing wrong with it, and she looks beautiful. And so not everybody was against it, but the gutter press took it up because they were against whatever the government did, and especially Marie Antoinette. She was fair game. They spread unbelievable lies about her, particularly because she was portrayed as a female, as a woman, as a feminine woman who was willing to change the stiff formality of the court, who had her own ideas and was standing up for them. And this was something they didn't like. So Marie Antoinette got a lot of flack for the painting, to put it mildly. But as I said, not everybody agreed. And at the end of the salon lasted for 6 weeks. At the end, there was a play that was opening, and Vigée Le Brun's friends knew the playwright, so they took a box for opening night, and they invited Vigée Le Brun. And it was a play about the painting. There was an actress who played her and painted the portrait. And when the curtain came down, everybody applauded and stood up and turned to face the box where Vigée Le Brun was sitting and to applaud her. And she said it was one of the most special evenings of her life to have that kind of recognition.
Well, that is amazing
So
validation.
that's why I chose the painting.
Yeah, and it's amazing validation for an artist to be so recognized. And I don't think there are a lot of occasions where anybody gets a play about them and their work. I laugh to myself a little bit because it feels to me like it would be in some ways a boring play to have the story of making an artwork and just someone sitting at an easel on stage. But I'm sure they had more to spice up that script. But this painting is absolutely beautiful. Listeners, if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that supports episode-specific cover art, you should be able to see it right there in the player. It's a portrait of Marie Antoinette from, what is this, 1783?
1783, right?
Yeah, 1783.
She's portrayed as an attractive young woman. She was a very attractive woman, an attractive young woman in a relaxed pose. And many people, Marie Antoinette liked it. She commissioned many copies, and she sent them to French embassies around Europe. So that's the way she wanted to be painted.
Well, and it's absolutely beautiful. And as you talk about like the backlash to it, I think it's amazing to me how there are some people who will find a reason to get upset no matter what you do. Like once they have determined that they do not like Marie Antoinette, it seems like, well, if she had done a traditional royal portrait, she would have been seen as too stodgy. But here she does something relaxed and soft and more, with the time. Then, she's not formal enough. Like it just seems like to some extent, as much as it's hard to pity a royal, there was no right she could do for a certain segment of that population. But I just, and this is because my background as someone who studied painting at the Art Institute of Chicago, and like I'm not going to pretend that I'm anywhere near Vigée Le Brun's abilities, but I love the detail in here. I love the different fabrics, the texture of the feathers and the hat, and like there's so much happening here that is just exquisitely rendered. It is absolutely amazing, just as a work of art, as a visual piece, even aside from the historical context and the history of it, and the figure in here is fascinating. But like for me, it's just, it first hits is just like, wow, this is an amazing piece to be hand painted, and I can see why she would be the favorite portraitist for Antoinette. I mean, it's very well done. Now, as I'm looking at the flowers in here, is there any rationale behind that? Is that just like a feminine symbol? Like, she's got you said the dress was just the style of the day, but in a lot of work, they agonize over every decision of what to include, what to show, what to not show. Why is she holding the flower like that? Like that feels like an unnatural pose to me.
Well, I think holding a flower is a feminine thing. Also, Marie Antoinette had very beautiful hands, and she's holding the flower with both hands, so it shows her hands. So this gives the artist an opportunity to show her hands, which are one of her best features. And I think it also adds to the relaxing pose. She has to do something with her hands. So she's holding a flower, as if she were doing a flower arrangement or something like that. But it adds, I think it adds to the femininity of the painting, which is what bothered a lot of people, incidentally. They were bothered because the queen's not supposed to show herself as a woman. She's supposed to show herself as a majesty.
Imagine the audacity of painting a woman in a feminine way. But I do, as you say that, I guess it does make sense. Like she's showing she's highlighting the hands. She's giving a little bit of movement and action to the pose, but also making sure that she's highlighting a feature that, was one of Antoinette's best. It was a pride point, I guess, like make sure she's giving that flattering look of the subject, capturing the best sides, the best angles. And, that's kind of what Vigée Le Brun was known for, was making her sitters look their best.
Yes, she did that, and she would sometimes do it by very subtly altering a feature that wasn't so flattering. But in this painting, she shows Marie Antoinette without any without any of that. This is a straightforward representation of what she actually looked like. She was an attractive woman. There was really no need to. Okay, she had certain features, some were more attractive than others, but she was an attractive woman. So there was no point in trying to portray her otherwise.
Now, yeah, agreed. Now, after one last short break, I do want to get a little bit more into the book and the research that you've done for it. Okay, now my guest today is Judith Lissauer Cromwell. We're talking about Louise-Élisabeth Vigée Le Brun. As we've already talked about, you have done a ton of research for this. I guess my first question for you would be, what are some of the things that you discovered about Vigée Le Brun in the course of doing that research for this book? Like, what maybe surprised you? What stuck with you? What made her so fascinating that you wanted to keep digging deeper and deeper? Any interesting little tidbits? I'd love to hear it.
Well, I think the most important thing that I discovered, and that really surprised me, was the obstacles she faced as a young woman who wanted to be a great painter. She always, as a child, wanted to be a great painter, and she had a tremendous amount of determination and ambition to do that. But she had to overcome unbelievable obstacles. Women, for instance, females could not attend art school, where the boys learned anatomy from copying male nudes. Women were supposed to be so modest that they couldn't look on a nude, male or female. So she was banned from those art classes. She couldn't go to the school where the boys learned perspective and composition. And the subjects for history painting, the classics, history, geography, she couldn't go to that kind of a school. She was barred from that as a woman. She suffered tremendous slander because of her association with Marie Antoinette. She suffered prejudice because she was a woman. Every woman who aspired to anything in the arts, music, literature, whatever you want, faced that. How could a woman be so talented? She must have a man who was really doing all the work. So Vigée Le Brun was also accused of having a lover who painted her paintings, and jealousy from other artists. And she asked for high prices. She succeeded in getting them, and they were jealous. So she overcame all those obstacles. They never held her back. She was not bitter. She was a very positive thinking person, and she just was determined to succeed. And she was really driven by her ambition and her talent. She couldn't have succeeded one without the other. But I think that surprised me. I didn't realize the real difficulty that she faced in achieving what she wanted to achieve.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting when I look at her work, and I look at her life story. There's a lot to it there that I'm kind of reminded of. The picture is so much about what you choose to highlight and what you choose not to. I mean, we could look at Vigée Le Brun's story as, a woman of privilege who was born to an artist and painted for the royals, or we can look at her as a tragic figure, as a woman who's our probably first artistic hero. Her father passed away when she was young, and she had to flee when the revolution was happening. And the truth is, there's a mix of all these different things happening in there, and her story, you can pick up on and pull apart and create almost these entirely different narratives from some of these different aspects that are highlighted and which ones are diminished. In your book, in your story, I feel like you did a really good job of telling the story fairly, giving like the full collection of the facts, and in a way that honestly, like for time, I can't, in a half hour, 10 minutes, sometimes for the mini episodes, like I can't get into a deep dive of these complex narratives, but you did a really nice job in this book. And I would encourage listeners who want to learn more about this compelling figure, pick up a copy. Like I said, links are in the show notes. But before we wrap it all up, I do want to ask, do you have any sort of final thoughts or takeaways from this story, or things that you hope our listeners will, hone in on as they're reading the book, or what you want people to get out of this, and why you see it as a compelling and worthwhile story that's relevant even today, 200 years after she was painting?
Well, relevance today is always an important issue, and I would say there are two reasons why Vigée Le Brun is relevant today. They're not necessarily in order of importance, but one, she painted the movers and shakers of her time at a time when Europe was on the cusp of the modern era. She painted the men who made the revolution, who were against the revolution. She painted the artists and the musicians and the writers who were the stars of the time. So her paintings have historical value. And the other reason her paintings are important is because of her talent. She was a very talented woman, and she left us a group of paintings that are outstanding and are hanging in every important painting collection in the world, all over the world. So for her achievement is something that's always relevant. I mean, we're always interested in those people who have achieved something and contributed something to their times. She was a female icon of her time. She knew everybody who mattered in the world of culture and politics, and they all knew her. She was a female icon in her time and recognized as such. And that is an achievement that that's impressive, no matter if it's 200 years old or it's of today, or if it's 1,000 years ago. So I think that's what I'd like the reader to take away from the book.
I have nothing to add to that. It was beautifully said, and I could not agree more. She's a wonderful, wonderful figure, beautiful body of work, and a lot of rich insights into history there. And I loved the book, and I really very sincerely appreciate your generosity with your time, and sharing your insights. I love getting the opportunity to learn from a historian who knows so much more than I do. And there's such depth of knowledge that you are sharing with me and the listeners and anyone who picks up the book. So just one last plug. The book is Louise-Élisabeth Vigée Le Brun, Portrait of an Artist, 1755 to 1842. And thank you so much, Judith Lissauer Cromwell. I really appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for inviting me.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.